Alright, here's example 13 from the quadratic unit packet, and this is on the day 5 notes. So before we do this one, just remember from looking at your notes that we learned this new value called I, which really is just the square root of -1. So now when we deal with problems, generally before we used to say there were no real solutions when you had to square root a negative number, but now because of this new terminology we're using, we can simplify problems that involve negatives under the square roots. To do that, we can rewrite these problems, and focusing on 25 with a negative, I can write this as the square root of 25 times the square root of -1. Because 25 times -1 gives me the -25. So I just broke it down into that piece. Doing the quick calculation in my head, the square root of 25 is 5. And now I have new notation. The square root of -1 just gives me I. So I can simplify this to equal 5i. Using the same process, the square root of 72, I can rewrite that as the square root of 72 times the square root of -1, because multiplying those together would give me the square root of -72. The square root of 72 doesn't really simplify or have a perfect square root. So I can rewrite this as the square root of 72, and then here I put the I in front. And the only reason I put I in front is because if you wrote it after, you might get confused and think it was included underneath the radical. We don't want to include it underneath the radical because it's already a part. It has a square root in its meaning. So this answer just turns into that. So the I again is coming from the square root of -1. For the final problem, -5 square root of -9. Remember, with radicals, this actually means multiplication here. So you're taking the value of -5 and multiplying it by the square root of -9. So I can rewrite it with parentheses if it helps people to see. But it's the same idea. You're just multiplying. So I'm going to simplify this part. And I'm not going to write it out this time because I think I've got to the point where I can simplify without having to write out all these steps. I know the square root of 9 is 3, and then to take care of that negative underneath the radical, I'll write I. So square root of -9 is 3i, and then -5 times 3 is -15. And the I is included because you're multiplying it by that as well.